You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries. This is a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games, where two GMs talk about the recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss overland travel. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody. Jody, how you doing today?
I am doing well. The season, it is a-changing. It's a little brisk in the morning, a little frosty at night, but warm during the day.
Well, I'm glad you made it all the way here, despite those conditions.
Oh, embrace them. This is my favorite times of year.
I know, but I was trying to do like a little precursor, a little nod to the overland travel. Did you not see that?
I didn't.
Okay, well,
great
we're moving
segue.
on. Today's episode focuses on different styles of GMing travel and encounters in an outdoor environment, which again, I was trying to do a nice segue to, but it didn't really work out. So Jody, take us to the table.
Hopefully this works better. So in the past few weeks, I've ran 3 sessions, and each session in its own way focused on overland travel or outdoor encounters, and I handled each one kind of totally differently. So the first one was just really wide open, had a map, and then had some random rolls on the Shadowdark random encounter tables. And just, Matt, you and a group of players, you met some Neanderthals / Northerners. You watched somebody have an unfortunate experience with an Otyugh. Aren't you glad I didn't randomly roll up one of you guys? And then run off by some lurking wood elves who, doggone it, they're good with their bows when they ambush you.
Strange. No, who would have guessed?
Totally discordant fiction there. So that was the first one. Second session, entirely scripted outdoor adventure. The adventure I was running was Mistaken Identity from the Enemy Within, or Enemy in Shadows, I believe as it's now called. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Adventure. Was running it in Shadowdark in my own fantasy world, but nevertheless. Now, this is classic module adventure. It is fixed location, fixed experiences. You are traveling by coach down a dusty road, meeting strange locals and even stranger, horrifying mutants along the way. But it's all scripted. You know what's coming as the GM, and then you just travel on down the road with your players. Now, my last session this past weekend was our ongoing monthly Sunday session dungeon crawls. But my dungeon I was running was quite a ways out of town, so there was a few days that I just rolled up on our own bespoke random encounter table. And as a result, that party meandered for what ended up being 4 days in the woods, following strange lights into the distance and getting lost in a bit of a time loop, and then hanging out with strange folk in the woods who turned out to be bandits who stole their stuff. And they desperately had to manage their resources just to arrive to the dungeon safe and whole. So each of those presented a wildly different set of challenges and opportunities for me as a GM. And I thought it might be fun to talk about those differences and then bring in, Matt, some of yours living on the world of hexes. So that's what we got for today, and hopefully you can get something good out of it.
All right, Jody, let us gather around the fire and talk about these 3 sessions with 3. Is this? I mean, I feel like we've done this before. We haven't. Moving on. 3 sessions with very different overland travel. Dude, first of all, you've been running a lot of games lately.
Man, I had a marathon last weekend. I played in 1, ran 2 in the course of 3 days. And by the end of the 3rd day, my brain was tired, but happy. Yeah. It was all 3 an absolute joy. The 3rd day had to really harness the get excited and bring that excitement to the table. Thankfully, a little sleeping in and a great big burrito before the game helped. And I was on a bender. It was good. Had a little extra time away from work, and
those weren't small sessions.
No, 2 were 6-hour-ers, though 2 I ran.
Yeah.
So it was good. And
chonky weekend.
Yeah.
RPG play.
Yeah, and then this weekend got a wide open calendar ahead of me to plan for the next weekend of running multiple games.
Well, it's good because it's just good to roll dice, but it's also just good because we got stuff to talk about on the pod. So let's hammer down on some overland travel. So where do you want to start here? What's kind of the thing that you were looking to focus on this go round?
I want to start with the scripted adventure, actually. That was bringing back together. I've been running these micro campaigns that are kind of through a looping timeline. So different groups of characters and some repeating players and some new players each time are all playing through a same timeline. My long-term one, and maybe future episode, is so what happens after you've had one area experience a group of players run through it multiple times, and what does that look like on the other side?
It's gonna be super cool. Do you think this is your last loop?
I don't know, because I got new ideas, which is what happens, right? That
Here's
players
the problem
play,
is
and then
I want to play again. So
need me to hurry up and be done.
I need you to hurry up and be done. I want to play again, and I think an addendum to that is I want to play again with a character. I don't want to roll up another level 1 character, Jody. I just.
What about a 0?
No!
What about 4 zeros?
No,
okay. So let me talk about that, this
right.
micro campaign. So I sat down to play with, my wife is taking part in this group, and then 2 other players that she has played with. The 3 of them have played a long-term campaign back in our 5E days. And they're coming back together with a new group of characters, and I'm taking them through the opening to the Enemy in Shadows campaign, kind of a famous, if you know Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, it is the famous campaign, and it opens with a very brief introductory adventure called Mistaken Identity, where you travel by coach and you experience the joys of the old world in and out of taverns and towns. Now, I have drastically abridged it because I wanted to make sure that in a session where they were going to come together, make their characters, and then play on the other end of it. Even though we had a lot of time, I knew they were going to want to catch up as friends, and then they were going to take making their characters pretty seriously, because they do, and then didn't know how much play time I'd have. Good news, it was able to tighten down. There's huge areas for amendment, but it was interesting to run a module that was exclusively travel. Another fun part about it was the notion of what does it mean to travel by stagecoach? What goes with that? What's interesting about it? Because just sitting and watching the scenery scroll by, well, lovely. If you've ever been on a modern train, not super interesting.
Well, this is the classic problem with overland travel, right? Is right here. We're getting to the meat of it right away.
So where Mistaken Identity kicks in is you go to this coach house and you start seeding all of these ideas and rumors about the next session. And it's the rumors that are on the road. And then you have, and I don't want to spoil the adventure too much, but you have the bespoke moment of Mistaken Identity that leads you into the next session. So it was kind of a fun parallel of the structure of traveling down the road is traveling the story down the road. It is a process of rumor collection and development and story development that would have been very, very difficult in a freestyle outland or overland travel, where you're just rolling on tables or you're hex crawling, that it's entirely a story element to bridge from an
this
intro
is a plot
to something.
device
Yeah,
we're talking about.
Yeah, and it did it
Jody,
in a way.
Once again, railroading your players.
No, stage coaching my players. I would like to change the vernacular on this term because railroads only exist in a very few fantasy worlds. No, I'm kidding. But your point of this is a plot device was a style of overland travel I don't know that I'd ever thought of or seen or worked with.
It's cool.
And as I thought back on it, it was like, what a neat opportunity that to go, oh, no, my travel is the means by which I'm going to move the story forward. How do I have them have an encounter on the road? And so this is, and I think this is why modules, to loop that just kind of tangent back in a very real way, why are modules so popular is the inspiration. It was just neat. And that was my first takeaway was just that. And I don't know, there's a ton of room for discussion there because it's bespoke.
Yeah.
And in terms of just the toolkit as a GM, thinking in terms of travel being a plot device rather than a tax.
That's a really interesting point because, and so while you were talking, I was letting your experience trigger things from like my past GMing and realized, I mean, of course I'm running Dolmenwood right now, which is a hex crawl, which is, I mean, we're doing mostly overland travel. it favors overland travel far more than it does dungeon crawling. But I'm running this 5th edition campaign once a week for your daughter and my sister, who are wonderful players, and we're having a great time. But it's a naval campaign primarily. And we just got done with hundreds of miles of oversea travel. And in a game like 5e that kind of wants for plot, right? I mean, it is, you can certainly run it in a more OSR generative style, but that's challenging for a number of reasons that I don't want to get into right now. It wants for lots of prep and encounter linked with encounter.
Yeah, they're heroic characters who want to have something happen.
Right. And what I'm hearing from you is making me think of what just happened in this game on Monday, which is that we had this encounter that I rolled up randomly prior to the session in my prep, but that was used as a plot device. Mm-hmm. And it introduced kind of a new faction. They were, to give some additional context, we're playing in the Critical Role world of Exandria, and we started on the continent of Wildmount using the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount setting. And because players will be players, and because of some of the things that I gave them options, I'm not going to give myself an out here. They immediately, or at least very quickly, decided that they wanted to get on a ship and go to a different continent, the continent of Tal'Dorei, which, thank goodness, there's a large setting book for that as well. So we had to do this, and I say had to because historically 5th edition and specifically just naval combat and naval travel in RPGs is sort of like this holy grail, mm-hmm. right? That no one has quite figured out how to do naval combat or naval travel well. And I want to just throw out a couple of like resources if folks are listening to this and this sounds of interest. First of all, I cannot recommend highly enough Pirate Borg as one of the best, if not the best, naval combat systems. I adapted it a little bit for 5th edition. If I feel comfortable, I might post those. But long story short, Jody, what I did was I used this naval battle encounter to build story and to build plot. And it wasn't a just like random encounter. We didn't really roll each and every day to figure out if there was going to be an encounter. We had done that a little earlier, and it just doesn't feel right for a heroic fantasy game.
Totally.
And so I think it's really interesting, this idea of using overland travel to enhance the plot. That's kind of what I did in this heroic fantasy game of 5th edition, set in a heroic fantasy setting. And it worked pretty well. Like, it created an opportunity, I think, to introduce, like I said, some new factions and some story beats for the characters in a game that's centered around the characters, like 5th edition.
Yeah, and I think we've talked in the past, and I want to bring it up now, that the random encounter modules that are in the Shadow Dark rulebook are so good for that sort of thing of you rolled before the session, so what might they encounter? Okay, now I can plan around that. And as you're saying, I think that piece that I'm taking away from Mistaken Identity is not just the encounter being interesting and tied into the world, but how do you tie it into a larger story if you are doing a narrative campaign? How do you make it work so that it's doing more story lifting? And I think that's a great point, that for 5e or more high fantasy style games and I share that belief that in those style of games, those characters really, it feels strange to prevent them from engaging with story. Right. That if just doing exploration, gathering loot always feels a little shallow when you're walking around wielding Mjolnir, like, hey man, like you should be doing some stuff.
Yeah. I mean, when you level up and you have these abilities that are bespoke for killing monsters and engaging in a heroic way in various encounters, and then those encounters don't feel like they're giving you an opportunity to be heroic. And like heroism isn't just I killed a monster. It's there's a story push behind it. And we're getting a little, I don't want to get too much into my feelings about 5th edition and why I feel like the strange dunking on 5th edition in OSR circles just drives me kind of bananas. But I'll just say for the record, it does. And I find it annoying. But 5th edition, wants for I think the reason that I wanted to talk about it was that 5th edition wants for a very particular style of travel that I think actually Shadow Dark games can pull a little bit from, which is this idea that if you can weave plot into your travel, it makes it more interesting for the players. And it gets a little bit away from, I think, the core ethos of a lot of OSR stuff, but it also has the advantage in a long-term campaign or in a campaign that is narrative and focused on narrative, that it kind of helps you make travel more interesting. Because I mean, how many YouTube videos and how many podcasts or whatever have tried to tackle this idea of like how to make travel interesting? It is just this ongoing problem that goes all the way back to wilderness survival in like the OD&D days, right?
Oh man, I have a copy of that I've yet to play. That
we got to
get it on the table.
Let's crack it. We'll get it on the table. We'll talk about it on the pod. It will be. I mean, everything's content these days.
The deepest of roots, right there. Yeah.
Well, so I'm going to set you up for something. I think this might be where you're going, because I want to talk about a game that isn't based on narrative, that is specifically based on dungeon crawling, which is our Sunday games.
Yep.
And I want to talk about like your experience, because you came up with this great idea, and I want to fully give you credit for this. And I think this is actually something that we can provide listeners and the community that will be a net benefit, which is this random, quote unquote, random encounter travel table. Give listeners and me, because it was your brainchild, a sense of what led you to this, like what it is and how you decided to come up with it.
This is genuinely funny. I was trying to remember where it came from. Like, where did we got it from? I didn't remember that I came up with this. So that's hilarious.
I don't know that if you came up with every encounter on the list.
Probably not. I'm not that smart. But here's what it is and why it is. So on Sundays, once a month, we gather with a wide open group of folks, ever growing, which is fantastic. And the idea is for people who can't commit due to family obligations or too many other games, as is currently the case, or whatever it is.
We got a lot of good problems in our RPG community.
We really do right now in that group. And so it's a once a month, you get together, you have a stable of characters, and there's some fixed dungeons. I'm running the Caves of Chaos from Keep on the Borderlands. Matt, you're running
Barrow Maze.
Barrow Maze. I was going to brick the name again. The Barrow Maze. And so we have these relatively large dungeons to be explored. You show up, you get in with a group. And for me, because my fantasy world that lives in my head is based, Matt, you said the best touchstone I gave you was think Old West, think Wild West. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, then that grittiness of travel has to be there. But the purpose of these Sunday sessions is get to the dungeon, get the loot, go home. It is.
We're not really role playing very much.
Very little.
It's mostly problem solving, exploration, some combat for sure, and treasure acquisition.
Massive, think classic old school dungeon delving, and we just focus on that. But I wanted that sense of place, that there is a town. We set in Fall Crest. It's a riff very loosely on
the Points of Light. The Points of Light setting from 4th edition.
Oh,
which is
right.
Maybe you don't even know that
I'm not really aware of this. No, so this is a blind spot in my D&D.
If I was going to run a classic fantasy setting, or in a classic fantasy setting, after I run in Dolmenwood, which is, as we talked about previously, not a classic fantasy setting, I would run in Nentir Vale, which is kind of where the Points of Light came from, like this idea of like small little wilderness towns, which is kind of your vibe.
Yeah, definitely.
Like that is discordant for me as not somebody who grew up and lived through in my RPG career 4th edition. It seems weird that you would set the most heroic of D&D editions in one of the most kind of gritty fantasy realms. Maybe I'm missing something. If folks have more context, please give it to us, because I don't think you have a particularly large amount of experience in 4E.
I don't. The vibe I get is that it maximized the number of dungeons you could go to.
Oh,
which those settings do,
go.
And that's why we've plugged in, and it's worked great for us.
So
but we digress.
That was a digression for sure. I want to get that out there.
So the travel event table that I'm going to say we came up with is a D30 table that we'll put in the show notes and is pretty much free to share. Is just what it sounds like, a D30 list of things that can happen as you travel. And the lower you roll, the worse it is. The higher you roll, the better it is, sort of, because it's overland travel. My party this last weekend, they rolled pretty darn well. And then the higher rolls are usually keyed to skill checks or skill challenges. And the party has a choice to engage with something. I'm going to just randomly drop down here. The party encounters an aged stranger in dark robes standing near a copse of trees. The stranger is muttering to themselves and gesturing at your group. Do you choose to investigate what's going on? And then the party either says as a group, yes or no. Yes.
And importantly, it is a decision. It is a binary decision, yes or no. And there's no like, well, can we go talk to this guy? There's no like, what's this guy's name? It is exclusively just, do you want to engage? And the understanding between it, there's a lot of transparency that like these are not role-playing encounters. They're not combat encounters. They are, you might roll some skill checks. You might not. Do you want to engage with this person?
Right. So this is very middle of the road. And if the party says no, no effect. And the majority of them, if you choose not to engage, you then pay your resources for travel. So you pay your ration for the day. I usually have them burn a torch. So, or contribute, to the campfire. So they need their 3 torches and then move on to the next day and roll again or arrive at your location. It's pretty straightforward. If they say yes, however, in this particular instance, it would initiate a normal intelligence skill challenge. So in the vernacular of Shadow Dark, you're rolling a DC 12 intelligence check. If the majority succeed, the stranger is a kindly witch who shares some secrets of their arcane teachings. Players in the group may now use the witch class when making new characters for future sessions. So this is how we unlock additional character classes for these Sunday sessions. However, if they all fail, the stranger disappears and dark omens of the chaos gods plague your dreams. Each player has a 50% chance of losing their starting luck token. This one's bad. You don't want this one to happen because it could just nuke your luck tokens. But that's an example. And early on, the first ones, some of them are just straight up, the worst it is you're ambushed by a troll. That's bad. You don't want a troll to ambush you. And then some of the great ones literally can produce free luck tokens or things like that. So it's just a random set of events that, again, Matt, you made the point and it's worth repeating is these aren't for role play. These aren't for deep narrative. These aren't for really plumbing the depths of being generative for a story. When I describe them, I'll try and story them up to the party that's there a little bit. But for the most part, it's clonk, roll the big chunky D30. A fun quirk that's kind of this is if there's a ranger in the party, they get to roll with advantage, and it's fun to describe the the ranger saw wolves, but then found you another path. And now you find this stranger on the side of the road.
Yeah.
So they get a little sense of, a little nod there. And then the party gets to explore. And there is a chunk of them on the table that are just nothing happens. It's just a day of travel. So it's a very different way of handling travel. It is purely mechanical. So it's a way to fast travel and still have stuff happen. And that for Shadow Dark, why I liked this a lot is it keeps the notion of resource management at the fore. That spending those rations each day of travel, having those torches available, doing those things is an essential piece. It is worth noting we do eschew a core rule. The food and water rules do say you can go multiple days without eating. We also use a fatigue or an exhaustion. So if you can't eat, you gain an exhaustion for each day you don't eat, and you just lose a gear slot in your backpack.
We don't even roll initiative if you run into that, the troll in your example there that you listed. Like we won't even roll initiative. We'll just roll some skill checks and you could potentially, this has happened before, you could die on the way to the dungeon.
Yeah, it's hard if you're low level and you find a troll on the way.
Right. But,
but that's a 1 in 30 and you failed the skill check. And
I think, you could take this and kind of rip it apart and make it to your taste. But ultimately the thing that we're trying to, I think, convey here is that this is the most down and dirty way to make travel, if not interesting, at least impactful and meaningful in a way that still attempts to nod to story and narrative. So attempts to make it kind of satisfying from that perspective, but it's not onerous. It takes at the table maybe 5 minutes to adjudicate, 2 or 3 of these roles. And it really is just rote mechanics that translate to a little bit of story so that on the way to the dungeon, perhaps there's a little nugget of like characterization for some of these characters that inevitably don't have long character arcs.
So if you need something quick and dirty, it feels like the travel table is just a quick answer, but doesn't totally obfuscate that travel happened. But I want to jump back to you, and you mentioned this a little bit ago, that you run in Dolmenwood, and I get to play in it, and we are hex crawling all the time. Not all the time, a lot of the time. If we're not in town, we are hex crawling. If we leave a road, we are hex crawling. It seems to me hex crawl kind of lives somewhere in between, but I'll be honest, I haven't run much true hex crawling. So talk to us about that. What's been your experience with hex crawl, and maybe then especially how does it feel in comparison to these other styles of running overland travel?
So my experience with Dolmenwood has kind of an arc to it as far as hex crawling is concerned. We started playing before the finalized hex crawling rules that will appear in Dolmenwood or in the Dolmenwood books was finalized. So I was using kind of a mishmash of Shadowdark's core overland travel rules, which are very light and don't provide a whole lot of structure. For those that are interested, though, Kelsey has released kind of expanded overland travel and hex crawling rules. They're available on the Discord, and we will, of course, put a link in the show notes to where you can find those. They'll be coming out in a forthcoming Cursed Scroll. I think later next year there will be a Kickstarter for that. But all that said, the hex rolling rules in the core Shadowdark book are pretty minimal. And so what I did is I just mashed them together and made my own version that hews much closer to the hex crawl rules of Dolmenwood. And the thing about Dolmenwood and the thing about the Dolmenwood hex crawl system is that it is largely based on the terrain type of the hex. And so the thing that was hardest for me to wrap my head around was how long is it going to take you to get from one place to another? And this is always, I think, in a hex crawl, the toughest thing to figure out is how long is it going to take you to get from point A to point B? And then what happens if you get lost from point A to point B? Because then you have to calculate a different set of distances based on how you got lost and where you got lost going to and how long it took you to figure out that you were basically, what I have done is what I think a lot of people do in hex crawls, which is started out with a very rigid system and then adjusted it and adapted it and kind of created some kludges that feel right for our group. I don't really like the highly mechanical nature of hex crawls. I feel like it gets way too far into just that place of, I don't feel like I'm actually traveling. I feel like we're doing a math problem.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that. I want it to be able to be very quick to adjudicate at the table so we can get to the narration, so we can get to the fun stuff. The fun stuff is not traveling. I think for me, the thing about hex crawling that has been frustrating and the thing that I have bounced off the most is mathing it out. I find that excruciating. And for some groups, it might be interesting. For me, that's not the fun part. The fun part is, do we get to where we wanted to go, and what do we see along the way that is of interest and that might cause us to sort of, squirrel,
right?
Like, go find this thing.
Well, I want to talk about those points of interest along the way, because I will say, as a player at your table, you have obfuscated the onerous math beautifully, and I don't notice it really. I know you tell us how long it takes to get there, and I go, okay. But you are big on emergent storytelling, that let's see what happens along the way. Let's see what those little tidbits, especially in Dolmenwood, along the way in the hexes, have been fascinating and really interesting. And I'm curious of that. So when I look at the different styles of running overland travel or being in the great outdoors, as it were, in a fantasy RPG, you've got totally scripted, so there's no emergent there. You've got random rolls on random tables, and gosh, we're just going to see what happens. And then we've got maximal, let's streamline just to the mechanical bit. Here's a table of stuff happens, make a skill check. Okay, move on. We have some fun flavor, but
right.
We got through it. we have landed, at least in my play experience in your Dolmenwood game, we've had a lot of pieces of information come our way, and it feels like the hexes are just bubbling over with potential story and potential interactions. And that's the part that I think for most GMs, when they see a hex crawl map, and I know for me, when I see a hex crawl map and I start reading hex crawl rules and then stop reading them because they get into the calculus of, are you on a horse or on foot or on a two-horse wagon, or is it an oxen pulling it? And I'm like, it lost me. But the juice of seeing that hex map is the potentiality of all those little hexes.
No, I'll answer this with a reasonably short answer. First of all, I use heuristics. I kind of round, I kind of judge. I want to say two things about your experience playing in Dolmenwood. Number one, no one is actually mapping the hexes. We do a lot of mapping in dungeons. People map dungeons all the time in our games, whether it's in a Dolmenwood game or otherwise. No one is mapping the hexes. So no one's calling me on these are 6 mile hexes, and no one can do the math but me. So if I round and it's a little off, no one can really call me on that, which I don't know if that's good or bad. For our group, I don't think anyone really cares, but for some groups, people, that might be an issue. The second thing is you all have a player version of the Dolmenwood map that is by far my favorite piece of diegetic or like story-based. It's a diegetic map. It is a map that you would actually be given in the game world. So what's cool about that is that map is not to scale, and yet it also provides you with points of interest and little Easter eggs and also just information about the relative locations of different places in Dolmenwood. So what that means is I can just focus on delivering information, and I can just focus on, oh, you're traveling through this hex? Let's see what's in this hex. And because Dolmenwood is structured and written in a very terse but also extremely readable and usable and gameable way, just look on the hex. Is there anything cool here that you guys would see? No? All right, we'll move on to the next hex. Oh, there's something cool. Deliver it, and we're sort of off to the races.
It works. And you mentioned the 6 mile hex. And I don't know if I'm setting you up to rant here, but
don't do it, Jody.
I'm gonna a little bit. I have always wondered. As a person, I enjoy some of the nitty gritties of the economy of a role-playing game, both in terms of actual coins spent and coming and going, but the logistics of then travel and housing, and these things I find interesting. There is, much like in real life, there is you can get so far on so many dollars with so much energy, with so much food.
Sure.
But you understand that in a way I don't, because you have another hobby.
Okay, you did.
Yeah.
You did the thing.
And in the summers, I typically lose my buddy disappears for a week or two, and you go out in the backcountry. Mm-hmm. And I don't do this. I am not a backcountry hiker or a hiker of any sort. To what degree do you see realism in hex crawl hiking?
Man.
What can you share with listeners about some of that, and if it impacts your GMing at all?
Okay, so I want to preface this by saying that I don't think that anybody play the game the way you want to play the game, right? I do have very strong opinions about this, but I wouldn't bat an eye if I played at a GM's table where they did things the way that they have traditionally been done, which I fervently and 100% disagree with. The idea that you can walk 24 miles in a day with all of your gear while you just fought goblins earlier that day or whatever, like, to put it bluntly, that's like Pacific Crest Trail or like thru hiker status. And when you're a thru hiker, which I have not been, but I have done my fair share of backcountry backpacking over very long distances per day that are in the 20-mile range. The idea that you would have a bunch of crap clanging around in your back is just not reasonable. If you are a thru hiker or you're a backpacker, you are trying to get your pack weight down to the absolute minimum. Like 12 to 15 pound base before you add food and water, which is a whole different concern that we're not going to get into. In my game, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, I do not let you travel more than 16 miles a day. And normally, if you are traveling on a road, I'll let you travel 16 miles a day, and then the next day, I will make it 12 from there on out. No one probably has ever...
No, I never see any of your math.
No one has ever seen this. But I'm telling you right now, you have never been allowed, unless you are on horseback, to travel 24 miles a day. It is not reasonable to me to allow D&D characters to walk 24 miles a day. You would have no feet by the time you got to town. If you're on a road, it might be reasonable to do one 24-hour stint, but I would argue that that's getting into the like forced march rules territory of like, you know, kind of BX and overland travel in OSR games. So that's my rant. When I adjudicate things, I look at the terrain, and if you're going over, you know, tangled forest, for instance, to put it in Dolmenwood parlance, you're going 12 miles maximum if you push.
Mm-hmm.
And my rules actually kind of accommodate for this. If you're going to go across a 6-mile hex walking, it takes base 4 hours, and you can travel for 8. That's a 12-mile day. I find it excruciating and annoying. So if you're mounted per my rules, it takes 2 hours, which means you can get to that 24-mile day, right? Because you can cover 4 hexes for a total of 24 miles. Bada bing, bada boom.
Easy.
I will rest my case there.
So you're saying a 45 to 55 pound suit of chainmail would impact your travel?
This is, yes. And like, I realize, I realized like everybody
could not be hanging any lower.
I realized like everybody has their thing.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody has their thing about quote unquote realism in D&D that drives them bananas. This is my thing, right? Everybody has their thing. I'm willing to dismiss so many other unrealistic things. And like, so there's so many good counter arguments to this. Like, I'm hypocritical in so many ways, but like this thing just drives me nuts because every time I'm out in the backcountry walking amongst, you know, and we live in California, so we're lucky enough to be able to like drive in a single day to the most beautiful mountain range ever. Come at me. Every time I'm walking in the Sierra Nevadas, I think, my God, if I was wearing a suit of chainmail right now, I would have sat down and gone to sleep 4 hours ago. Like, every time. And it's just funny to me that we continue to perpetuate this like 24-mile day as being something that's reasonable when it's just not, and it wouldn't really affect our games very much. It hasn't affected Dolmenwood at all to make you guys basically limited to 12 miles, maybe 16-mile days. Anyways, so that's my rant on that. I'm sorry.
No, I set you up for it.
Not to you. You set me up. Yeah. I'm sorry to listeners if this might have been like, this might be just a complete and utterly useless bit, but I don't know. Maybe
so
not.
I am curious. No, what I am curious to hear, gentle listener, is if you share Matt's particular, this bit of realism just sticks in my craw and I can't let it go. I have mentioned and will continue to mention the 10-foot pole. Thank you for it being a pole in Shadow Dark. It's not 10 feet long. That one snaps my head. That one makes me explode. Like, how are you walking around with it?
I'm willing to forgive the 10-foot pole, full stop.
And what I want to hear from folks is if you're hearing this rant.
Yeah, what is your thing?
I already said mine. Mine's economy.
Not you.
Oh, yeah.
What I want to hear what other people's
that's the
things
punchline
that break them.
Yeah. So add us, join us on the Discord, jump into the show notes. If you're on the Facebook, what is the weird trivial thing? Cause we all got them, or Matt and I are very lonely and weird, which is also maybe true. Thank God we found each other. Is what's your weird thing that your fantasy world hang up of like, this is not realistic, that is just a trope? Because there's a bajillion of them in the games that have existed for years. And I'm going to tell you, Matt, I look at the hexes and I'm like, yeah, you can go a hex a day. You can go 2 hexes a day and then pay your food, and I have no idea how far it is. It's just a hand wave of
like walking is hard.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. So add us. What's yours? And we're curious what folks have their hangups, and maybe we
and you
can
don't
all
do marathons day after day after day, right? This
hit the sword, buddy. I think we're there. Let's hear from our sponsors. We'll come back and see what we got out of this.
Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by Hench Recruiter, the smartest way to fire. Finding good hirelings and retainers is hard these days. You never know who's going to show up, and more importantly, if they'll be sober. Well, Hench Recruiter has you covered. You can confidently find torchbearers and trap finders from among thousands of competitive resumes. If you've been wondering whether you should be holding a torch or a shield lately, there's probably a sign that you could use a little help on your next delve. Jody, you used Hench Recruiter to find a hireling recently. Why don't you tell us about your experience using this excellent service?
I used to struggle with, it's a bastard sword, right? And then a shield would be nice, but God's damned, it's dark down here. And then I hired Sparky and everything changed. That halfling carries a torch like nobody's business, right at eye level, right where you need him, right where you don't. All the support I could have asked for. And I'll be honest, my meals have never tasted better with that little guy around.
You too could have the experience of hiring a highly qualified, highly trained henchman or retainer when you sign up for Hench Recruiter. And if you do so, Hench Recruiter will post signage around your town of choosing. And most parties end up finding a match within just one day. Exploring dungeons and looking for treasure is only getting more complicated and more competitive these days. If you want to find the most valuable treasures, you need to be competitive in this new era of crawling. So use the code DMD when you sign up to take 20% off your first town posting. Hench Recruiter, the smartest way to fire. All right, Jody, let's bring the topic into light now that we've heard from our sponsors. What is your first takeaway from that freewheeling discussion about overland travel?
I'm going to throw in a curveball. I'm going to be the bend in the road. I'm going to be the switchback here.
This is a loose app.
It really is. And we didn't talk about this at all, but it is an essential piece. Make your outdoors deadly. Make your parties nervous about going outside off the beaten path. When they leave the beaten path, these sessions I've played in that I have loved and have lasting memories about travel, it's because we went off the road and something weird and wild happened. My players, hopefully I've been able to give them some experiences like this, or they have an understanding of there's a reason the fantasy world works the way it does, that there are feudal states and the deep, dark things of the woods are out there, and the Griblies and make your outdoors deadly. When they get out there on the road, don't be afraid to throw them in over their heads. They have unlimited space to run away. Let them.
All right, my first one, you actually kind of preempted this by laying out the way that mistaken identity works with this idea that along the way that you're traveling, you're getting plot coupons. You're getting like little, plot development items. And I think that's such a smart way to do travel. If you can, if it makes sense for your game, that you are allowing travel to be a narrative beat and not just be travel for travel's sake, but actually having it do something to move the story forward.
This just occurred to me. One of the random events I rolled up on my own table, apparently, had that you get a new rumor, and they'd kind of taxed out the rumors they had. So I quick drew them up a map of one of the dungeons and handed it to them because they found a dead body and he'd mapped some stuff out. And I was like, oh, well, here. And so it was kind of that, though. It was a plot coupon just on the fly even. So room to do that. All right. This is my next one, my last one here. Consider the big picture for what your campaign game is about. I mentioned that our Sunday sessions are about get to the dungeon, steal the loot, get home. It's not about travel. So we use a system that's maximally tight. Dolmen Wood is about exploration. It is about an emergent story. A hex crawl system is wildly appropriate there. And in the case of an opening session that features a lot of travel, yeah, we need that as a scripted sense, like mistaken identity. So just think about, what is it I'm trying to do in this session or in this campaign, and how does that travel piece fit in, and then adapt your mechanics to meet your needs.
All right, my last one is make travel work for you, not the other way around. Because all too often, I think, as GMs, we can get wrapped up in making sure that we're adjudicating things the way that the rules either say or suggest they should be adjudicated. And I think just with travel in particular, what your players want is for you to be fair and also for you to get to the next interesting thing. And I think when travel fails to provide a satisfying experience, it's because we as GMs leaned too heavily on mechanics or too heavily on stuff that the players aren't really finding interesting, and we didn't get to the fun stuff, get to the new story beats, get to the points of interest. And, Jody, I've been able to pull the wool over your eyes about all the crazy changes I've made to Dolmen Woods travel system and stuff. So, I mean, I'll take that as a win, and kind of the basis for how I came up with this takeaway.
As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in our discussion that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences or things about fantasy games that make you frustrated, go ahead and share those with us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread in the Shadow Dark Discord channel over on the Facebook page. Look for links to any materials we referenced in this episode in that thread or in the show notes. If you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can find Jody on the Shadow Dark Facebook page under the handle Pezman, and you can message Matt via Discord using the handle SCMatt. Until next time, get out there and see some stuff.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production and is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadow Dark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.